All right. So welcome everyone to another career chat here with Schools I Can. We this week are focusing on human resources, and you may be asking what that means. So you're in luck because you're going to find out everything about human resources from several experts who have been working in human resources and program management for many years, and they will share with you their stories, how they got where they are, and what it means to be in human resources. We'll also have a short little video, a couple minutes, from an individual who couldn't make it today, but works within human resources, but specifically in equal employment opportunity work, so for the US government. So we will show that video towards the end. But for now, we'll get started. So we're going to start off by having each of our panelists just introduce themselves a little bit, say what their name is, where they work, what their title is, and anything else that's kind of like an introduction before we dive more deeply into what that means. So perhaps we can start with, let's go opposite on the slide. So Kristen, why don't you start, and then we'll go down the slide that way.
Sure. Thanks for having me. I am Kristen Spagai. I'm the Executive Vice President of Global HR Shared Services. I work at Broadridge and have been there. I just celebrated my 20-year anniversary over the last summer.
Great. Congrats.
Thank you. It's been great.
That's so great. Sharice, would you like to go next?
Sure. I'm Sharice Messiah. I'm the Program Manager of Actuarial Talent Management. Specifically, I manage our leadership development programs, and I have been in HR for 20 years, at Prudential for 9 years.
Wonderful.
Well, I feel like the baby here. I don't know if I qualify as an expert next to you ladies, is what I meant to say. Nothing to do with age, but I think your level of expertise in HR supersedes mine. My name is Angelise Cordero, and I also work at Prudential with Sharice, and I manage our Finance Leadership Development Program, which is a 3-year rotational program across our functions within finance. And I have been working in HR for almost 10 years, so I have the expertise. So I'm actually looking forward to learning from you ladies. And I, before Prudential, I worked at UBS Financial Services, and I kind of found my way to HR. So looking back, the dots connect really well, but I didn't always know that I would end up in this career, but I absolutely love it. Happy to be here, thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you guys. We're happy to have all of you. So I think we should go a little bit deeper into what it is that you guys do and what it means. All three of you happen to do HR at like financial services companies, more coincidental than anything. But if maybe you could talk a little bit more about what does your title mean? What does it mean to work in human resources? Regardless of what type of company it is, and what does a typical day look like for you? So I don't know who would like to go first on that.
I'm always happy to chat, so I'm happy to go first. So yeah, wow, typical day. I don't think there is any such thing as a typical day in my world, but let me explain some of the stuff that we do in a shared services environment. So when you think about human resources, you think about centralization of work. And so that's what my team does. We centralize a lot of the information that human resources and programs that human resources works on. So my group in particular, I have several teams that report up to me. So we process payroll for 6,500 associates in the United States. We also process all of the benefit programs for the United States associates. So anything from your medical, your dental, your vision, your life insurance, all the way through your retirement programs like your 401k and any stock programs that we have. We also handle HR operations, and that is all around policy and systems and the how-to, sort of like that, what I'd call the old-fashioned front desk person that answers questions when they walk in the door. But we do it through a call center, and we do it through online information rather than a walk-in center. I also run the HR systems across the globe. So that's for about 15,000 workers across 15 different countries. And most recently, about 3 months ago, I took over talent acquisition, which is basically like your staffing department and recruiting department. There is, as you can imagine with all of that, I have a team of about 70 people that report up to me, and there is no typical day. So, yeah, but we can get into what that actually looks like, but that's basically what my group handles.
Wow. So it sounds like people should like you because you're in charge of making sure that they get paid and they have benefits.
I'd like to think that they should like me, but however, given financial services, and I'm sure Charisse and Annalise can attest to this, there are a lot of audits that are required to be done to eliminate any potential fraud. So if I was a criminal, which I am not, I would have no way of stealing money or allowing people to have extra money in their paycheck, because there's so many checks and balances that eliminates the possibility of fraud.
Good to know.
So you're going to get paid whether you like me or not.
Oh, okay. Excellent. Well, I don't know who'd like to go next, Charisse or Annalise?
Yeah, I can definitely go next. I think where Kristen kind of left off, where she talked about talent acquisition and just inheriting that group, that speaks a lot to my background and how I first got my start in human resources. So talent acquisition essentially is also recruiting. And they're the group that helps to hire and bring people into the organization. When I graduated from college 20 years ago now, unfortunately can't celebrate my 20-year anniversary this year, but when I graduated from college, my first job was in human resources. And human resources has evolved since then. It's been a long time since then, but how it was structured was that within human resources, you had all of these like different groups. Now we have what's called like centers of excellence, but recruiting was one of those groups. And so when I joined as an HR coordinator. And basically I was lent out to benefits and retirement plans and legal. They had HR legal in the group at that point, and then recruiting. So I got a little bit of exposure to pretty much all these different areas, and the one that I liked the most was recruiting. I really enjoyed, just kind of graduating from college, being able to go back to college and, help other people that might have been friends of mine find jobs or just give them any insight as to the process. And so that's really where I kind of found my niche and what I liked the most about human resources. So my first job, I was in like a recruiting function, and I was helping the senior recruiter. So looking at resumes and helping to decide like what candidate to bring in and matching, the job description to the people and vice versa. And so after that, I was at a financial services company, go figure, but it was a very small boutique, only 1,400 employees, and we were only national. And then 9/11 happened. And funny enough, the company was in, a deal to be purchased by none other than Prudential. It was an investments company, but then 9/11 happened and that company just kind of dissolved and Prudential kind of pulled out of that deal. It just was way too risky. And if you know anything about Prudential, we are pretty risk averse, but it was just a very risky thing to do at the time. And the company did ultimately go under. So at that point, I was still really young in my career. I had only had about maybe 2 years of experience, but knew enough to know that what I wanted to pursue was recruiting. And so I took a leap of faith and I moved to Chicago and took a job as an HR manager in Chicago, where my focus was on recruiting, but I had exposure to compensation, and a lot of other a lot of other HR processes, just more of a generalist role, but with a focus in recruiting. So I was helping to built a company that Kaplan, which most of you might know if you do your SAT or PSAT prep. I was working for Kaplan at that time. And in their Chicago office, they had recently purchased a small company and they were trying to build that out. And so there I was an HR manager doing more generalist work, but still had that lens of recruiting. So ultimately, I'm from Brooklyn. I'm a city girl. Chicago was beautiful, but in my heart was the second city for me. So I wanted to come back to New York. I missed my family and I missed my friends. I was out there by myself. So I decided to move back to Chicago, but of course didn't want to come back without a job. So I ultimately came back and still worked for Kaplan, and I moved into their benefits department. I was there for maybe about 3 years in benefits, just learning so much about not just 401k plans and like health and wellness plans itself, but really understanding the laws behind benefits, which is a huge thing in today's society, right? Healthcare in the United States. So learning a lot of the laws and the impact that that has on the plans that we offer our employees, understanding the pricing and all of that. So that was a huge learning, but I also knew it wasn't the area that I loved the most. And still wanted to, find my way back to recruiting. And then an opportunity came about at Standard & Poor's to help build their campus recruitment function. They had an internship program, but there really was no strong tie to like being in an internship and then getting a job. So they were looking to bring some cohesiveness to their programs. And so I left Kaplan, I went to Standard & Poor's to work as a campus recruiter, which I love that job, just being able to be back on campus again and helping people with their careers. So through all of the different jobs that I had since I left college, in human resources, I knew that recruiting was the area that I wanted to be in. And so after doing campus at Standard & Poor's for a number of years, I then joined Prudential on the experienced recruiting side. For personal reasons, I couldn't do the campus recruitment schedule anymore. It takes a lot of travel and there are, really busy cycles. And I had just started my family, just got married, et cetera. And so I wanted a slower pace. And so I did experience recruiting, but still had that campus recruitment love, just not the love of the travel that it required. And so that brings me to where I am now, which is the program manager role. And so ultimately, I am in what we call a shadow function. So I'm back in human resources now, but so basically I'm aligned with a particular business unit that is not human resources. It is in finance, and I help them with bringing talent into the organization. So I get to focus on things like campus recruitment, but also diversity and building programs to ensure that individuals have a pathway into an organization like Prudential. So as you can see, like human resources has so many different facets to it. If you're more interested in legal, for example, maybe the employment law, and maybe the video that you'll show at the end of this can maybe talk a little bit more about employment law, but there's the EEOC piece of it, right? If you're more interested in the healthcare aspect of it, maybe the benefits role. If you're very math oriented, maybe it's compensation. There's so many different ways you can go with human resources, even if it's marketing that you're interested in. There's a place for, pretty much it's just such a broad area of business. And pretty much every company, I think, has a human resources department, or at least somebody serving in that function. So obviously I'm biased, but I would recommend a human resources career just because of its broad nature and how many different ways you can kind of spin your career, all still within the same industry.
Oh my gosh, that's great. Thank you so much.
Sure.
And Angelise, do you want to tell us a little bit more about your role? And maybe you could also tell us a little bit about how you got there, and then we'll go to Kristen to hear more about her story of how she got to where she is too. So Angelise, go ahead.
Sure. And I actually want to take a step back for a moment and explain kind of what you both touched on, but at a higher level. So when you think about human resources, think about the employee lifecycle. And it starts with attracting talent into an organization and recruiting them. And then we follow the employee, throughout that life cycle until it ends, meaning they leave the organization for whatever reason, or they let go from the organization for whatever reason. So when Charisse talks about, breadth of opportunity in HR, that's what she means. There's all of these areas within HR related to this employee life cycle. So there's attraction and recruiting, there's onboarding and operations, the training and development, compensation, benefits, employee relations, talent management, succession planning, and then the offboarding process. So even when employees leave the organization or we have to downsize for whatever business decision, there's a process related to that. And then within that employee lifecycle and all of those different areas, there are processes, there's technology components, there's the people components. So even within a specific department, there are different roles within HR that you can play. And also depending on the organization. So, in graduate school, the way that they had us think about HR, so I have a master's in HR management, and it was, you can either be a generalist, which is sort of like a jack of all trade, and you have knowledge in all of those areas related to the employee life cycle, because at any given point you could manage any aspect of that. Typically, those generalist roles are more on the small to mid-sized companies. Large organizations like a Prudential, we're so massive in size that we have specific departments dedicated to those areas of HR. And so the other track is being a specialist. So that's, you're a master of a particular area of HR. And so I have tried kind of both. I started my career actually in nonprofit when I graduated from college. So I studied behavioral sciences and double minored in Spanish and Latin American studies. I wanted to save the world one woman at a time. And I had no idea what that meant in terms of a career. So I went and I worked for a nonprofit in Newark, which interestingly enough, so the dots connect, Prudential now sponsors that or they've always sponsored this organization from our corporate social responsibility arm. So I worked there and I managed the Hispanic Women's Resource Center. So there are a lot of HR components and elements to my role, even though I wasn't in an HR role. So I did a lot of training and development and career readiness for immigrant women who, just had the language barrier and needed to learn how to navigate American education system, the workforce, etc. 4 years into that role, I knew I needed to do something different. That's when I went and pursued my master's in HR management after having conversations and realizing that maybe that's something I wanted to give a try. Although my initial, maybe some of the students have this perception too, if you've ever heard of HR, we tend to have kind of a bad rep as the benefits people or the employee relations people that get you in trouble, or you think automatically to payroll. And that was my perception as well. I was like, I don't like any of that. And then I learned about all of these other really robust areas of HR. And in my graduate program, I realized, okay, well, I have these different tracks that I can try. After I graduated, that's when I started working at UBS Financial Services. Similarly to Charisse, I started in a coordinator level, but I worked in an HR services delivery area of UBS Financial Services. So I did a lot of onboarding, offer letters. It was data entry at its best with our HR system. So again, that's another area of HR. There's an entire HR system that someone has to manage. I did that for 2 years. It was a great first job. I learned a lot about the business, even though I wasn't facing the business. I supported recruiters that were recruiting for our financial advisor branches out across the United States. And so I interacted and I had to understand a lot about the business itself to know about the offer letters and the compensation packages and things of that nature. But I knew that wasn't why I wanted to be in HR. That stuff, great learning, but not for me. So then I tried the generalist route. And at UBS, also a really large financial services company, their model was a little bit different. So it was kind of like a triage center. It sat within our HR service delivery area. And so that meant that we took calls from employees who needed different services, but because of the size of the organization, a lot of those areas were outsourced to other external vendors. So payroll, for instance, was run by ADP. And so if someone had a payroll issue, I had enough knowledge to try to fix some of the initial issues, but anything more specific, I would have to send them off to ADP. So again, not a role that I loved. I felt like I was it was a glorified switchboard, and I didn't want that kind of HR role. But I thought that was a stepping stone to being an HR business partner, an HR manager. And within that organization, a lot of the work that even they did at that level was around downsizing exercises and laying people off. And I knew that wasn't the kind of HR work that I wanted to do. So within the organization, I had the opportunity to also transition into early talent acquisition or campus recruiting. And I think that's just an area that is fun. It's really engaging because you're working with college students and they're so happy to be a part of the workplace. They're, you know, they haven't been tainted yet. They're bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. And I think the other part of it too is like attracting them to the organization is really unique. So you have the vantage point of selling the brand of the organization that you're working with and why you enjoy working there. So it's a really a cool you know, area to be in. I love that role, but by then it was 4 years into that organization, and I knew it was time to try a different organization, because I could tell that there wasn't enough growth and development for myself as an employee of the organization. So I came into Prudential, I worked in the campus recruiting team, loved it. And within a couple of months of doing that role, there was an opportunity on our diversity recruiting team. So D&I, or diversity and inclusion, sometimes falls within the HR organization, depending on the organization, and sometimes it's tied to recruiting. So some of the things that Sharice talked about, some efforts when you're collaborating with external organizations that are affinity-based. Sometimes it doesn't fall within HR, so you know it really depends on the organization that you're looking to work at. And so I did that role for 2 years, love that as well. In terms of the work that I was doing though, it felt more like a project manager role because I was managing these large conferences and events with these external partners. And I knew ultimately I wanted to work with early talent. So now what I do, and I transitioned into this role, it's gonna be 2 years in July, is that I manage a full-time rotational program. So we have an internship program and I have a peer who manages that program. Those interns, if they perform really well, they get an offer to come into our 3-year rotational program after they graduate from college. And once they start with us, my role is to sort of shepherd them throughout the 3 years that they're with us. So it's sort of like a mini HR business partner because my role entails you know, compensation, it entails succession planning, performance management, but the majority of my role, I would say, is coaching and development. And that's the part about HR that I absolutely love. So it's empowering employees with the resources and the tools and the knowledge to be successful. And these are really high potential students who come into this program without much experience aside from our internship program. And so we have the unique ability to coach them and to develop them so that by the time they exit the program after 3 years, they go on to any roles across the organization, and they have been given a lot of exposure to senior leaders. We've trained them from a very technical perspective, but also their soft, or now we call them power skills. And so the ability to have that imprint on someone's career early on, to me, is very gratifying. And I would say my day-to-day, similar to Christine, varies. It's a lot of meetings, but majority of my role, I would say, is relationship management, stakeholder management, coaching and development, and then strategic. So how do you make sure that you continue to innovate, and that I run a legacy program. It's been in existence at Prudential for over 16, 17 years. And so how do you make sure that a program like this remains competitive, and that the way in which you're training and you're developing these associates is aligned with what's happening in the market and is engaging for them and is giving them access to the skills that they're going to need of the future. So there's a lot of strategy involved in that too, and creativity. So how do you continue to innovate and engage with the next generation that comes into the workplace? So I have 3 classes. The highest class, the graduating class, they're millennials, but my first year class, they're not, they're Gen Z. And so there's a little bit of a difference there. So what I love about my journey to HR is that I'm one of those rare people that actually uses their undergraduate and graduate degree, but not because I planned it. It just kind of happened that way. So as a behavioral science major, you know, understanding the sociology, the psychology, the anthropology, that's what I studied. That is something that I use every day because I'm working with people and I'm managing people. And then I have the human resources framework. So
that's great. Well, thank you so much. And I think that's also, it's nice to hear your story of how you didn't start with HR and then how you found your way to it. Kristen, why don't you tell us more about your story? And I know you've been at Broadridge for 20 years. So tell us, did you start there or how did you get into this field? And tell us more about your journey.
Sure. So I didn't even know what human resources was when I got into it. So we'll just start there. Yeah, back at college, I went to George Mason University in Fairfax, Virginia, and I was a political science major. I too thought I was going to change the world, one country at a time, and I thought that country would be the United States. Lofty goals. I actually had an internship at the White House during the Bill Clinton era, and I realized very quickly that politics was not for me. So I quickly changed my major to psychology, and I thought I was going to be a mental health counselor. So I had internships at a local prison, a rape crisis center, and I thought that that was going to be my journey in life. And so I went to go get a master's degree, and I was actually going for addictions counseling and thought I would open my own practice. And I had an internship, and that's, you know, one piece of advice for everyone: definitely get real experience, because you will either quickly realize that it's the right path for you or it's the wrong path for you. And getting that experience is really important before you make any final decisions on your next stage. Everything, you know, whether I decided to go into another field or not, I think every experience you get is worthwhile, whether or not it's the career you want or not the career you want, because knowing what you don't want is just as important, if not more important, than what you do want. So definitely internships all the way, whether they're paid or free, take it, take whatever you can get. So I actually had an internship at a long-term residential facility for drug addicts, and realized again that that was probably not the path that I wanted my career to take. But now I was more than halfway through a master's degree in addictions counseling, and I went, what do I do now? Because my whole life has been going towards this counseling degree, and I didn't think that was what I wanted anymore. So I spoke to one of my counselors at now Fairleigh Dickinson University in Madison, New Jersey. And I said, what the heck do I do now? And they said, well, why don't you think about human resources? And, you know, I don't know about any of you all, but my father was a plumber in the Bronx, and he was a solo business, so he was on his own. And my mother was an elementary school teacher in the Bronx. And so neither one of them knew anything about corporate America and offices and businesses. So I really didn't have much guidance at home. So I listened to anybody who would give me information at school. And they said, well, human resources, and they kind of explained what it was. And back then, it was just off the cusp of the old-fashioned personnel department where you did payroll and benefits, and that's all you did. But yes, it's not like that anymore. So I took an internship again as an intern at Newport, which was the old AT&T Corporation. And I was doing some talent acquisition work. I was doing some low-level roles in terms of recruiting. I was helping with building their career website, so which is about the time that websites were coming out. So just tell you how old I am. So it was, you know, it's definitely something that I really enjoyed and I really liked, and I think I like the fast pace of work, and that's how I got started actually in my career in HR. So I would say it's very accidental, very unexpected, not something that I have a degree in, but I've been there for 20 plus years in HR, and it's been great. I actually started, I think. The panel mentioned generalist, was sort of like a jack of all trades. So that's actually how I started my career, was in generalist work. I was doing that for about 7-8 years. working with different leaders within the business to sort of set up how their employees were structured, how we hired them, how we fired them, how we developed them, how we did performance appraisals. And so I worked on that for about 7-8 years. And I got into shared services. Again, my whole career seems like one big accident, a happy accident, but an accident. So I got into shared services because my job was actually going to be eliminated based on my location and based on the fact that I had employees in remote locations and other HR people in those locations could handle them. And so again, I took advice from people I knew, and they said, listen, there's a role that, you know, is for the leading shared services group, which is the call center for HR. And I remember saying to the person, I don't know the first thing about a call center. I've never run one before. And they said, don't worry, you'll be fine. You've got good leadership skills. I said, okay. So I did it. And that's, you know, 15 years ago, that's how I started my career in HR, was, again, somebody taking a leap of faith in me and saying, go run this group. And I ran that group for a few years. And then I moved into the company I'm in now. And again, by that, I got into that, I would say, strangely as well. I remember there was a job opening for a head of payroll and a head of HR systems. And I remember the head of HR at the time called me and said, I really want you to come and interview for this position. And I remember them saying, you'll run payroll and you'll run HR systems. And I remember his name was Richard. And I said, Richard, I don't know the first thing about payroll, and you want me to run the department? I don't know anything about that. And don't worry, you'll be fine. That was sort of the trend of my career is, don't worry, you'll be fine. You got it. It's okay. And that's really how I got into HR. Very a happy accident, I would say, but I love it. And clearly I like it because I haven't left after 20 plus years. So.
Wow, that's incredible. So, you know, we've had actually a couple of questions that were submitted, and I want to go to some of them because I think you've touched on a lot of this in your remarks. But one of the questions that a student had submitted was, do you have to major in business or HR management to get into this profession? And I think you all kind of demonstrated that that's not necessary. But I did want to ask you, just in, you know, a few minutes, do you guys think that there are any particular things that students should, if they are interested in HR career, should study, maybe certain majors, or are there certain certifications or trainings or anything like that that they should be thinking about as they leave high school? Is a 4-year degree required for these jobs? And if so, you know, what should you be studying or training for?
Yeah,
so
if you don't mind,
yeah, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah, okay. So there's so many ways to, I think, answer that question. I think it depends on the size of the company that you're going to join. So whether you need a 4-year degree or not, I think if you're joining a much smaller sort of mom and pop shop or a smaller organization, perhaps not. Perhaps you don't need it. Maybe you need more trade skills in terms of administrative and legal law, like paralegal type of a degree. If you're going to go into a larger organization like a Prudential or a Broadridge, I would bet most of them are requiring a 4-year degree, if not a master's degree or a master's of business administration of some kind. I also think the panel talked about the different facets of HR. So you really need to understand who are you as a person and what is going to make you happy in the work that you do. I think some of the panel said, I would never want to do payroll or benefits. That's not what I want to do. And that's totally fair, because there's other people that would say, I don't want to work on employee relations because I like things that are more black and white as opposed to the gray area. And so if you're more of that black and white person, maybe compensation or benefits where you're doing analytics and math and data, that might be more of the place for you. But if you're more of the, I want to join HR because I like people and I want to develop them and I want to help them with their career, maybe a generalist role or a business partner or a training role is more for you because you're going to have a lot more interaction with people. So I think it really depends. It's not even necessarily the type of degree, it's the type of skills that you come out of that with your degree. So again, if you're looking at like compensation or benefits, you have to know how to use Excel. And I don't mean just, you know, adding things in the cell. I mean, deep formulas, how to do calculations that are a mile long. So, you know, there's definitely different skill sets that I think are probably, in my experience, more important than the type of degree that you get. So that would be my opinion, but I'll defer to the rest of the panel for their experts, since they do a lot of the development stuff.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you, Kristen. I would add also, so I didn't mention it, but I too had a social science degree. I was a sociology major. So I too thought I was going to save the world, groups at a time. And I ultimately ended up here in HR. My entrance into HR was accidental, kind of like Kristen's, but I think the difference now is we know so much more about HR beyond just the personnel department, as we used to be called, right? We know of like these different areas, and I think the privilege of being able to have chats like this so you can learn more about it, you can kind of gear you know, what you study in school to help you with this, whether it's a social science, it could be psychology for, you know, for your career in HR, and that there are definitely aspects of psychology that we use each and every day in what we do. But the other thing I wanted to add was that I feel like HR is a career that you really grow in, right? I don't think anyone, you know, just jumps into HR as a VP. I don't think that happens overnight, right? I think you have to have that experience, and you have to go through, you know, maybe different areas. If your career is all in recruiting and that's what you love, and one day you know, end up leading the recruiting function for a corporation, that's great. But I think having the diversity of the experiences is what really gets you to be a really strong HR leader. And I would encourage anyone to try the different areas of HR. Kristen mentioned the internships. I think that's extremely important. I mentioned going into benefits, and I did a little compensation, and that really helped me realize that, you know, the recruiting space was more of my passion. I would say, you know, if you are going into HR, just keep an open mind. You know, no job has to be permanent, it doesn't have to be forever, but it's important that you get a diverse background if HR is, you know, what you're pursuing. Definitely try the different areas and find where your niche is.
The only thing I would add, I agree and love all of the points that you both have made, especially Kristen, when you talked about that, you know, there isn't a need for a particular area, and really knowing what you like to do and what you enjoy, and then using that that knowledge of what brings me joy and meaning, and then how do I find the career that matches that. So I think oftentimes students especially are guided toward these very like linear sort of tracks, and so they start to feel very overwhelmed when they don't know, well, if I do this, right, because that's how education tends to lend itself. So if I do this, I get an A. So if I study this, then it's going to give me this career. And that's just not how careers are built anymore. They're not as linear. Like we are even, you know, look at all of our experiences. They're very kind of all over the place. And it's a matter of connecting the dots. So what did I learn from this, and what do I really enjoy? And let me try this other thing. But what I wanted to add was that it also really depends on the kind of company. So you could, we said this already, but sometimes people are unhappy in a particular area, and it might not be that HR isn't for you. It might just be that HR at this company isn't for you. It might be that you belong in a place that's bigger or smaller. So really like getting to know yourself, to Kristen's point. And the other thing I would add is like the future of HR. So there's going to be a big need for people that have that data analytics background and that can use data to inform how we strategize and how we develop these different areas of HR. So, you know, I'm sure the rest of the colleagues already, my colleagues here on the panel already have situations in which we rely on data to either make a decision about who we're recruiting, how we're recruiting them, or looking at the numbers to see what you know, how many employees we're going to need to recruit for, what does the training and development space look like, how are these skills translating into the work that they do. And so just some of that data analysis is really important to inform the work that we do. And I think those skills, you don't tend to think about them because, again, HR is the people function a lot of the times. Of course, we have that compensation and benefits and those more technical areas of HR, but people tend to think of the people side of it. But even with the people side, you're going to need data to inform strategy and development and the rollout of different things. So it can be essentially any major, but going back to knowing yourself and what you really enjoy doing.
Great. We have two other questions that came in that I want to get to quickly. One of them is something I think that's been on everyone's minds just in general, given everything that's going on in the world and being quarantined and all that fun stuff. But specifically for those of you that are working in HR, you have to work with so many people and all of their needs. So how do you exercise your own self-care? So it seems like it would be hard to work with other people's problems all the time. So how do you separate that out? How do you help people with their problems, but always, take care of yourself as well?
I can start on that one. So I mentioned moving to Chicago, and when I was in that role, we had just recently purchased a small company. And generally, when you have any kind of merger or an acquisition, there can, most times there are roles that maybe aren't needed as much or not needed at all anymore. And so you have a situation where people are sometimes losing their jobs. And so when I first got there, I was tasked with what we in corporate call cleaning house, right? So I was tasked with developing all these plans to basically lay people off of their jobs. And that was really hard for me. Just as Angelise was mentioning, just knowing what you like. I like the happier times. I like being able to say, you get a job, you get a job, you get a job, right? I love that aspect of the job, and having to, take that away from people who have been working with this small company for, many, many years. People who are the breadwinners for their family, people who are close to retirement, right? And I definitely was taking that home with me. And it's very, very stressful to have to do things like that. How I found balance, one, I obviously left that role because it just wasn't the right role for me and my person, like who I am as a person. It just was not the right match. But even with my role now, where I am helping people with their careers, I have to deliberately remind myself to shut off, right? It's a deliberate thing that you have to do. As much as I want to help people, part of my role, I do a lot of coaching. Angelise mentioned coaching with associates that are in my rotational program. And that psychology and sociology part of my brain has to be turned on for that. And I do take some of that, with me, trying to figure out ways how I can help and make situations better for them, or just basically fit pieces to the puzzle. But you just have to just remind yourself that you do have to do self-care. Outside of work, there's a whole other part of me, right? I have a husband, I have 2 children, I have friends, I love brunching, I love salsa dancing, Angelise. Angelise owes me a salsa dance party, so it's a thing between us. But there are so many other things that amount to my own self-care, right? That I have to deliberately shut myself off. It's also good to have and work with a team that's supportive of things like this. But it's also good to protect your time. So 12 p.m. every day on my calendar is blocked. And that's deliberate, and I choose. If somebody needs a meeting at that time, I choose whether or not to open that up, but it is deliberately blocked. And so there are things that you have to do to protect yourself in that way.
Anyone else want to have any words on that?
Sure. So I think knowing who you are and knowing your limit, there are companies that are, you can find those companies that are strictly, I get in at 9 and I leave at 5. And if that's the company for you, then that's great. That's not my company. My company is, here's the workload. You figure out how long it's going to take you to get done and then go get it done. So there are definitely weekends that I'm working, 5-6 hours just to kind of catch up. This morning I was online with my India team at 6 a.m. So just, you just have to, for me, I know I can be flexible with my schedule because Broadridge is flexible with me and I have to be flexible with Broadridge. And so it's a two-way street. It's not just about the company saying, we want you to have work-life balance. I actually think work-life balance is a misnomer, and I don't think anybody should ever use that phrase. Personally, I think it's work-life integration. It's part of my life, just as my husband is part of my life, just as my dog is part of my life, and just as my me time is part of my life. I have to figure out how to integrate all those things so that that balance works for me effectively. The things that I like to do outside of work, I love to travel to international countries. I just absolutely love meeting other people and other cultures and just being immersed with other folks. So I'm a heavy, heavy traveler. I like to hike and rock climb, so I love being outside. I'm a staunch vegan, and so we grow all our own vegetables in our backyard, so we love to cook with it. So those are the things that my husband and I like to do, and hang out with our furry kids who all have 4 legs.
The only thing I would add is internally in the workplace, you can create balance by leaning into your colleagues. And, for me, that's one of the ways that I perform self-care when I'm at work. And so when things start to when people say, well, don't take it personal, or like it's business, it's not personal, it's similar to the misnomer of work-life balance. It's like, how can you not take it personal? This is your everyday where you spend the majority of your time and energy. So it is personal. And so when there's situations like that, knowing who you can go to have a conversation about it, knowing who's, I joke, one of my, I call her my work wife, and she's one of my really good friends because we actually started our career at the same nonprofit, went in different directions, and both ended up at Prudential around the same time, on the same team, cubes across from each other. And now I'm in a completely different role, but she's the recruiter for the program that we manage. And so she's my go-to, like whenever I need a sanity check or someone to vent to or someone to share gossip with. It's like, Cheeseman, let's hop on a quick call, or let's go to let's go get coffee when we're back in the office. And now even during this lockdown, there's moments where we'll text each other like, do you have 5 minutes to chat? And we connect that way in order to have that balance, and that self-care isn't always something that you do on your own. Sometimes you do it by engaging with your community and your mentors and people who care about you.
That's really great. And I think a lot of that would apply probably even for any career, not even just HR, but all of us. So what we're going to do, because we only have a few minutes left, is I did want to just show you this slide. So we do have someone named Sabrina Noel. She couldn't make this time, so she sent a little 2.5-minute video that I'd like to share with you guys. So hold on one second as I switch the screens and show you this. And I'm really hoping that my internet is strong enough that it's going to come through well. If it's not, somebody tell me, okay, if you can't, when I started, if you can't hear it well. Either way, I will be sending out the link. When we send out the link to this video, we'll send this link out as well. So let me start this and then let me know if you have trouble hearing it.
Hello, could you tell us your name, where you work, and what your title is?
My name is Sabrina Noel. I work for the federal government, and my title is Equal Employment Opportunity Specialist.
And what does that title exactly mean?
An Equal Employment Opportunity Specialist is someone who, at least in my case, works for the federal government, and they speak with employees who believe that they have been discriminated against by whichever agency that they are employed with. So they might believe that they've been discriminated against based on their race, their national origin, their age, their religion. And so I tell them what their rights and responsibilities as someone who believes that they've been discriminated against.
And what do you actually do for that work?
So what I do is I speak with the aggrieved person, and they tell me their issue, and I speak with them about the resolutions, about how they can reach a resolution potentially.
Okay, and what does a typical day look like for you?
A typical day looks like me speaking with a complainant about about the issue and helping them resolve it.
And can you tell me how you got interested in this career? What inspired you to do this type of work?
What inspired me was I spent 2 years living in Eastern Europe as a Peace Corps volunteer, and I faced a lot of discrimination while I was living there. And I believe that it's important to alleviate discrimination, and so this work is really important to alleviate discrimination in the workplace, but also in the world.
Okay, and is this something that you did right out of Peace Corps or university, or did you do it after having some work experience?
I did this after having work experience and being in the Peace Corps.
All right. What does it take to get a career like yours?
To get a career like mine, there are varied backgrounds that people have. There are people who have law degrees, there are people who have master's degrees, there are people who have bachelor's degrees. It varies, but in my case, I have a master's degree.
Okay, and can you give some advice to high school students? Like, what would you tell your high school self?
I would tell my high school self to say yes to every opportunity.
Great. Are there certain types of skills or courses they should learn or study?
In my particular case, I studied political science and sociology in undergrad, and I have a master's in public administration.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much.
All right. So did that came okay? That came through okay? Yeah, okay, good. All right, so with that, we just have a few minutes left. So I was hoping that each of our panelists could maybe just say a few words of wisdom, some final thoughts. What would you tell your high school self? What do you tell our high schoolers that are watching this? And any last final words? So perhaps we will go in the same order we started with. So Kristen, if you would like to start.
Oh, okay. No experience is a bad experience, even if it feels really bad at the time. Take it, learn from it, grow from it, and be bold, be a leader, read a ton of stuff that maybe you're not even interested in, but read it anyway, and chat with people and get as much experience as you possibly can, whether it's, like I said, whether it's paid or free. Just do it, and it'll pay off in the long run.
Great.
Yeah. So I 100% agree on the reading. I would also add, just ask questions, be inquisitive, ask a lot of questions, put yourself out there. It's okay. If there's any time that you're allowed to make mistakes, it's now, right? Also, to take risks. Life only gets more complicated as you get older. So if you can take advantage of travel, Kristen said that she loves traveling. If you can do that now, I would say absolutely. If you're in university and you have an opportunity to do study abroad, take advantage of that, learning other cultures. It just gives you new perspective. It helps you with working with different cultures, even in the workplace. So being able to travel and just learn about other cultures, other people's way of life, it just brings a lot of clarity to the workplace, I think. It makes it easier to work with a diversity of people. But also just going back to taking risks. If I had to redo my life, which, you know, I love my life the way it is, but if I had to redo anything, I think I would take more risk and just be a little bit more serious about my high school work and trying to connect the dots as to how I can use what I'm learning, because really what you're learning in high school is just life skills, right? How I can use those life skills and learn about myself to help inform like the career that I would want.
Great. And Angelique.
Awesome. First of all, ladies, thank you for that advice. I was taking notes myself. Really great advice. One thing that I wish somebody asked me earlier on in my life was, what kind of lifestyle do you want to live? Because our careers are at the center of our lives, right? They're, you know, they're what provides your livelihood, your ability to travel, your ability to own a home or a car, or these very tangible things that you don't think about when you're in high school. I mean, you might see your parents and how they're able to provide those things, but you don't really have a very clear perspective of how all of that works. I certainly didn't. Similar to Kristen, you know, I'm the first in my family to obtain a bachelor's degree and a graduate degree. So I didn't have those role models that worked in corporate America, or even what those kind of jobs looked like. But I knew pretty early on the kind of lifestyle that I wanted. I wanted a certain flexibility and freedom, and I definitely wanted a job that was going to propel me from being, you know, growing up in a working class community and family to have more financial security. And so that's when I started a nonprofit, and I realized quickly that if I continued working in nonprofit, I wasn't going to be able to sustain the lifestyle that I wanted for myself and that upward mobility. And so knowing what lifestyle you want, I think, will help to inform some of the decisions that you make, because I think students have a lot of pressure. There's a lot of choices, and sometimes that's really overwhelming. And in high school, you have to decide what college you go to, if you go to college, or what trade school, or what you do after that that's going to translate into a career. And I don't think we know that early on. We're still developing as people, but you have an affinity towards certain things. So paying attention to that and being open to the journey. I loved what everyone else said about taking risk and about no experiences being a bad experience. And I would just add to do your research and be reflective. Tap into yourself. Like, what is it that you really enjoy doing? And don't necessarily follow a path that other people tell you you have to follow, or a career that people tell you you have to do because it's gonna, you know, yield X results. Do what makes you happy, because you're gonna work for the rest of your life. You have at least 30, 40 years of work to do. So you might as well make sure that that work that you do gives you a lot of meaning and joy and is filled with purpose. And I think that's how you create a life that is really fulfilling and really happy.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for all of this advice and for being here for this panel today. We really appreciate it.